Okay, so we're going to be talking about a sense of urgency, and more specific, the difference between a healthy sense of urgency and maybe an unhealthy sense of urgency. So I pasted a link. Let me paste it here one more time for the interactions as we go. This one's a little bit different because there's not like an app for it, so you have to bring it up in a side window. And a lot of the examples we're going to be looking at center around our dog, Bella. And the feedback I got last time was that I needed to have Bella as part of this. So hopefully she'll make her way down here at some point and we can include her. This was when she was younger. So first question for you. How would you complete the sentence? My team would achieve greater things if only we had more time or less time. Just what's the mentality of your team? You'd get more things done if you had more time, or you'd get more things done if you had less time. And there's not a right or wrong answer, just how do you feel about your team? What's the general impression of your team here? And I'm going to mute everybody just to make sure. Feel free to come off mute if you have something to say, but just to try to avoid any accidental embarrassment. Okay, so most of us feel like we'd get more things done if we had more time. And that's a very legitimate. But I want to show you a quote here from Bernstein. And he said, to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. And the reason I like this quote is because I think it really hones in on something, that having more time can sometimes make it even harder to deliver something. So I think he said this around the time when he was doing, I can't remember which musical it was he was doing that this quote came from. But his experience was in creating these musicals, West Side Story and others, was that the deadline and the urgency was part of what actually made it successful. And sometimes I think it's very easy for us to focus on, if we had more time, we'd be able to do better. But maybe, just maybe, that's not maybe that wouldn't help us as much as we think it would. Maybe there's some sense of urgency that can help us be more successful, even if we don't have a lot of time. So this is Bella, and this was when she was a younger puppy. And so in training her, I noticed something, because there's lots of things we wanted to do in training her where we wanted her to be, we wanted to create a sense of urgency. So she's about 2 now. This was before she was 1, I think. Particularly situations like this. If you have a dog, here is a very a common situation. We have about 2 acres here, and there's a road. The cars go pretty fast, and we wanted her not to run toward the cars. So in this situation, it's very urgent, right? If she's headed toward the car, it's a very urgent situation. We don't want her to run toward the car. But how we convey that urgency, if we have a very unhealthy sense of urgency, particularly before we had a really good relationship with her and she trusted us, if we start yelling at her not to go to the road, that might create an unhealthy sense of urgency that would actually push her away from us out into the road, right? What we actually want here is a positive sense of urgency, or healthy sense of urgency, that's actually going to be, it's very important to get back to my owners. Both of these could be very urgent, but very, very different in the results we're likely to get for our dog. So here's, if we do kind of a graph here. So we've got really big urgency things that are like on big scale, and then small scale. So big negative would be we yell at the dog at the end of each day if she hasn't behaved perfectly. Okay, that would be really big. We're working in large chunks of what she did and have negative feedback. On the other hand, we could have really big and say, okay, at the end of the day, if she makes no mistakes, we're going to give her lots and lots of treats. So it's this positive feedback, but on really large scale things. Possibly so much that she wouldn't even know what she was getting the treats for. On the other hand, there's small. We can yell at the dog for each mistake, or we can give positive treats for every positive action. And if we split this stuff up, we start seeing something like this. So we've got the negative, which is really focused on not failing, right? We don't want her to do anything wrong. But then we've got the positive that's more focused on, hey, we did something right, let's win. And most animal training is focused predominantly on the let's win, making sure that you're rewarding positive behavior. There's a little bit of on the negative side, making sure they learn not to do things. But for the most part, with animal training, we're focused on let's win. We can also split this the other way and say, on the big side of things, if we're giving her treats or rewarding her or getting onto her at the end of the day, that's really slow feedback. And with most animals, and probably people too, if you're not giving rapid feedback, it's not going to be associated with whatever it is that you're trying to convey. I know when we had a horse and we're doing things with the horses, it's like if they do something that you like, you need to make sure you give them feedback right away, because a few seconds later they're going to forget what it was that you're rewarding them for. Same thing for dogs. On the smaller side, we got fast feedback, like something good happened and you're getting either a reward or some negative feedback from that. So, what does Bella need to improve her performance, right? Does she need treats, ear scratches, or a one-on-one with her manager? What do you think Bella most needs to improve her performance? Okay, so looks like most of us see treats, and here, come here, Bella. So just so you get to see her, here is Bella. And see, Bella, they're all voting for giving you treats and ear scratches. What do you think? Okay. Okay, well, last time I did this, the feedback was that what I needed to improve was have her on. So I've done that now. Okay, so treats, ear scratches, one-on-one with her manager, and those are all good options. In this case, we're going to actually have Bella have a one-on-one with her manager. So here she is having a one-on-one with her manager, Dandy the cat. And Dandy's telling her, "You've been working on a year and haven't delivered anything. Shape up or you'll be fired." So that would be one approach, right? So where does that fall on this graph we just did? What type of urgency is Dandy conveying to Bella? Is it the big urgency or small, or a big or small kind of unit that we're thinking of? We're talking about a year here. And is it negative or positive? Being fired. And the reason we're doing this and talking about, it may seem silly, we're making a graph of how to interactions between a cat and a dog. But what I want us to do is really start thinking about the interactions we have with our teams. Where would they fall on this? And I think sometimes it's easier to take a silly situation and start putting it up on a graph so we have maybe visibility into what we're actually doing in other situations that maybe matter more. Of course, this situation matter to our dog. If we're going to fire our dog, we're not going to fire our dog. Okay, so yes, most of us are saying it's kind of up here in it's big, we're dealing with things at a year, and it's negative. You're going to be fired if you don't do what you're supposed to. Well, now contrast that with this. So Dandy is now having a one-on-one with Bella and explaining to her that we need to deliver something, however small, to the customer this week. What scope can I cut to help us succeed? Okay, where does that fall on this graph? So in this case, Dandy's saying, what can we leave out to make us successful, something this sprint or this week? So we've kind of got a spread here. And I know sometimes when we do this, it clicks and gets the wrong thing. Looks like most of us are kind of trending down towards saying it's positive, right? How can we succeed together? And it's also something small where we're dealing with something in terms of a week instead of something where we're saying, this has been happening for the last year. Now, I see a lot of us have this on the big scale, and maybe for your team, delivering anything would be a really, really big thing. As far as it being negative, my way I was picturing this was more as a positive of how can we succeed together, not if you don't do something, we're going to fire you. But there's not a right or wrong answer here. That's just how I was seeing it, and there may be better ways for Dandy to actually conduct this interview with Bella. So in this case, most of us are saying this is smaller at least than the other. It's not like you've been working on this for a year. We're dealing with something like saying this is what we want to do in the next week or next 2 weeks. And it's also a more positive interaction. It's not like you're going to be fired. This is focused on how can we succeed for the customer. So when we talk about things that are urgent, here's a few examples of some projects I've seen that handled urgency differently. So this one project was it was a debt management project, and keep track of lots of debts and when payments were coming in, make sure they're allocated correctly and things. And in this particular case, there was a sense of urgency, and that urgency was turned into driving down the cycle time. So there was a lot of urgency on the team, and what they did is they said, this is really urgent. We want to make sure that we can quickly get something through from when the customer asks for it all the way through to production. So they did a lot of interesting things, like they set up their production environment before they even set up their QA environment, because they wanted to practice and say, okay, in the most difficult to deploy to environment, the one that has the most controls around it, we want to practice that the most. The QA environment isn't as big a deal to us because we know if we meet all the requirements for production, we'll have met everything we need for QA. So they invested in getting that environment up first, and then practiced every week deploying code to it and making sure that they could meet all the requirements, meeting all security requirements and everything. But the thing that was driving that was the urgency of saying we need to be able to deploy quickly for our customer all the way through to production. And that urgency was driving that shorter cycle time. The urgency also drove things of having conversations with the customer about what the customer might be willing to leave out. Whoops, there we go. Asking the customer what types of things the customer might be willing to defer in order to get something that was more valuable to the customer. And I've used this example before, but one of the things that this particular project did is the customer needed a calendar that would handle all the holidays. The system needed to know what days were holidays, what days were federal holidays, because things to make sure it did not process things on days that were federal holidays. And one of the requirements the customer had asked for, and was very important to the customer, was having a calendar in the UI that you could go in and actually, add things to the calendar, see what was there, add things to the calendar, add new holidays, or change the day that holidays fell on as things shifted around from year to year. And this was very important to the customer, but the sense of urgency prompted a conversation with the customers that said, you know what? We can definitely build this for you, but is it possible that this might be less important than some of the other things that are on the list of things to do? And after talking to the customer, the devs and the customer were talking to each other, and the customer said, you know what? We could probably just load this in. If we could get this in an Excel sheet, just a list of the calendars, we could load it in for the next year because we know what those dates are. And once we load it in for the next year, there are probably other things that would be more important to us because we wouldn't touch it for the next year. That UI that we're asking for wouldn't be useful to us in the next year once we have a year's worth of calendar entries in there or holidays in there. So they said, we'll defer that and we'll wait and do that later because just the bare minimum that we need to get the system up and running, there's other things that we can't run without. This particular thing, if we can load it in through just an Excel file through the database, that would take care of us for a year. But that conversation came out of this sense of urgency of trying to decide what can we possibly leave out in order to succeed as a team. On the other hand, this other project was it was a financial auction system, and it also had a very strong sense of urgency. But the way that urgency actually carried out in the team was very, very different. The urgency drove the creation of bugs. And so what was happening was they would have a story, they would deliver a story, and then they would say that story's done. Later on, the customer would go in and try to use it and discover that there was a problem with it. So they would go back and say, hey, this doesn't work. And they would create a new story as a bug to fix the thing, to make the original story work the way it was supposed to in the first place. And as things became more and more under a time crunch for them, they were doing more and more of this. And so when the suggestion was made that maybe we ought to have the customer more involved in the development work and actually signing off on things before we say they're done, the sense of urgency, this bad sense of urgency was, no, we couldn't possibly do that. It will slow us down. Well, in actual fact, what it was doing, the fact they weren't doing that was slowing them down more. So for every story they finished, they filed 2 or 3 bug reports that were going to be worked on later. Anyway, it was a very bad, there was a lot of stress and stuff going on, but it was a very bad situation for this team working on this. But a lot of what happened is they started with a sense of urgency that was inspiring negative behavior, and then it just spiraled from there. Whereas the other project that I was telling you about, that sense of urgency spiraled in a way that made things better instead of worse. And so what I want to point out is that the sense of urgency can lead to much better outcomes, really good things, or if it's being done in a negative way, it can make the projects a lot worse. And no, it's not the Night Trader company. This was actually something else. But I'm pretty sure the example I'm thinking of wasn't them, but that's a very common thing. This happens in a lot of places. So I may have been describing the exact same thing you've seen in other places. So let's look at some tips for healthy urgency. So what would it look like to have a healthy sense of urgency? And so question for you, which is more valued in your team? So not like what's the right answer, but just in your team right now, do you feel that your team values getting a change to production as being more valuable or writing lots of code? In other words, imagine it, if you were able to get something through to production, spend the whole sprint getting your changes through to production, and very little code was written, would that be seen as more successful than writing lots of code but maybe not getting it deployed and saying we'll deploy it later? And some of this probably depends on who you ask. My experience is that where a lot of teams say that getting a change through to production is more valuable, for a lot of them, writing lots of code is actually what's more valuable in the way that in what they actually do, in the way people actually behave. So if we're talking about ways to have a healthy sense of urgency, the concept that frequency of finishing something is more important than the magnitude of the work. This is not, in a lot of organizations, this does not come naturally. This isn't the natural default that people make. The idea of finishing a small piece of something and saying, hey, we finished this story, this particular story is done, now we move on to the next thing. Oftentimes, and in most organizations, there is a tendency toward trying to do more work. And so a lot of this comes down to just how we measure work. If we're measuring work in a way that we can feel we made lots of progress by doing lots of work that has not been deployed, which is very, very frequent or very, very common, then we're probably not going to be prioritizing frequency of finishing over the magnitude of the work done. And some of the ways you'll hear this mentioned is that people say things like, we don't want to have to touch this again. Or sometimes even, we've got to do it right the first time. If doing it right the first time is being used as an excuse for not delivering something because you don't want to have to come back and touch and change it again, then you're probably valuing the magnitude of work more than the frequency of finishing. In the healthy teams I've worked with, the frequency of finishing is such a priority that the team is very focused on getting it to work with the expectation that they're going to come back and make changes to it and evolve it as they go. And when you have a team that's taking that focus, they end up doing a lot of things very, very different than the team that's saying, I only want to touch things once. They do things like invest in tests because they know they're going to have to come back and change it. So they want to make sure if they make a change that it doesn't break anything. They also tend to invest more in good continuous integration and things being able to deploy quickly and automatically. They also tend to invest more in the collaboration with external, like security groups and things like that, in making those flow quickly because they're expecting to have 5, 10, 100 different changes go through in the same amount of time that the other group is expecting to only do one deploy. So those are some things that can help create a healthy sense of urgency. So question for you, a member of your team finishes a story they are working on. So they finish something, it's done. What are they more likely to do next? Are they most likely to start a new story, to help someone else finish work that is in flight, or to do training? I'm going to put this link back out here again to make sure everybody's got it, because it's more fun if everybody's participating. And we'll give something away in the end too. You can also, I think there's a way to ask questions as we go, or there will be at the end, or you can throw something in the chat. Yes, Randy's thing of stop starting and start finishing. Training, you wish that was the answer. Stop starting and start finishing is a very good way to, it's a nice little mantra to say, are we focusing on finishing and delivering something, or are we focused on starting new things? Okay, so it looks like most of us are working on teams where we're more likely to start a new story. We got one person that's doing training, although I don't know if that was just the hopeful answer. A few, there's about 7 of us that are working in environments where they're more likely to help someone else finish what's in flight. And what I want to suggest is that if we are on a healthy team that is focused on finishing stuff, we probably ought to be more in this area of trying to help other people get things across the line. If we've got, let's say within a sprint, if you're using sprints within a sprint, we've got these 5 things we're working on. We finish one of them. There are 2 still in flight, and 2 left to be started on. We are probably better off if there's anything we can help people with, get the things that are in flight across the line, because that represents real value to the customer sooner. Some teams have different efforts for story. One team member may work on Databricks notebooks, another work on infras. Let's see. So that's why they start a new story. I'm not saying there's never a situation where you shouldn't start a new story, but the first thing I am suggesting, the first thing you should try to do is go see if there is anything else you can actually help people complete, because that's where you get your value soonest from, is finishing something. And I would suggest that if you have a team that is doing that, where the default thing is not to grab a new story, but to see if they can help something else finish, you probably are dealing with a more healthy sense of urgency than if it's a situation where people feel, I need to grab another story right away. Because the urgency that's tied to how do we deliver something sooner for the customer is going to be more productive than something that's based on how do we just have more magnitude of things that we're working on. Okay, what would inspire your team to help finish in-flight stories before starting new ones? So just thinking in terms of this, what would make your team more likely to finish in-flight stories before starting new ones? So what could change about your team? There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just curious to see what people say. That might make your team more likely to say, I'm going to go, somebody on your team finishes a story, they say, I'm going to go help Bob and see if there's anything he needs help with to try to help get his story across. Team versus individual goals, that's a very good one. Suggestions from another team members during DSU, money, reward, assist. So the team versus individual goals, this is one reason that I do not like putting people's names on the cards. I don't like assigning, within a small team, I don't like assigning cards to individuals. And the reason is because then we start saying this belongs to Bob, which means Sue doesn't work on it because it belongs to Bob. And then we start having this idea that Bob can somehow succeed by delivering his, while Sue can fail while not delivering hers. And we really, with healthy urgency, the team ought to be looking at how do we deliver the most for the customer, and it doesn't matter whose name is on it. So that's why usually I try to keep people's names off the individual tickets on the board. Not being measured by individual tickets, that's a great one. Familiarity with subject, yes, cross-training, that's one thing. If you don't know anything the person's working on, that's going to be a lot harder. In sync, getting value across the finish line, completing the sprint. These are some good things. Bacon and peanut butter cups, I really like that one. And I will point out that Bella would be very much in favor of that too with her manager. That would be a good one. Commitment to sprint goals, focus on completing sprint goals, defining goals. And the focus on completing sprint goals, one thing I want to point out is that oftentimes we want our sense of urgency to drive us to try to create the best possible future for the customer. And if we've got 5 stories that if we complete them, we'll meet our sprint goal, and we start all 5 at the beginning and finish none of them, that is probably a less optimal future for our customer than if we've got 5 sprint goals and we actually finish 3 of them and are almost done with the 4th, right? But those 3 can actually go to production or wherever it is that the customer can start giving us feedback on. That's a better outcome. And depending on how our sense of urgency and how we see our teamwork, focusing on completing sprint goals could encourage us, depending on how it's presented, to start more things instead of saying, let's finish the things that are in flight. So that's an interesting thing I've seen people do. So a mentality that's very helpful is encouraging people to think, we don't care what you've started, we care what you've finished. And so imagine a manager going around really asking all the developers, how many stories have you started? That's going to get a different a, a different focus from the developers than a manager that's going around and saying, okay, when was the last time we deployed something to production? What was, when is our next smallest thing that's going through to production? That's a very different approach, but it will have very different, very different, sorry, very different, very different outcomes for the developers. The things that we're asking about really make a big difference in what people are going to deliver. I was working with a manager one time, and I was really encouraging him to ask your people how long it's going to be till they get their very first story into production. Instead of asking when they're going to be done, which tends to focus everyone on trying to start more things, just ask how long is it going to be till we get that very first story for this new system all the way through to deploy to production. And that particular team, that helped focus them in a way that let them focus more on getting all their pipeline set up and things so they could deliver stories all the way through, and they had a successful product launch. So how does your team perceive the following measures of progress? So just rate these. So stories that are code complete, stories that are deployed to QA, or stories that are being used by the customer. So I think you've got a slider. Drag those back and forth, or choose the numbers on it, about which ones they consider very important and which ones maybe they don't see as being quite as important. And I'm going to throw that link in here one more time. I'm trying to get everybody on so when we give away the book later, you guys can compete in the competition too. So you can also go to Minty.com and type in that number, which if you're on something that doesn't let you get to Minty, you can do that just from your phone as well. Okay, so while people are filling this out, I'm going to just mention a few things here. Let's see, can I go over this? Okay, so here's some things that are coming up. So today we're talking about creating a sense of urgency. Next week is going to be pretty interesting. We've got Jitter Ted coming, also known as Ted M. Young. And Astrid had actually suggested reaching out to him, but he's going to be coming in and showing us his test-driven development game. And he's got, I think you can buy the game, and you can also download the game and print it out yourself. He said he'll have a special deal for anybody that comes. So he's going to show how the game works to help give people a really good feel for how TDD is supposed to work. So I'm looking forward to this. And Astrid, thank you for mentioning him. It should be a pretty interesting just look at what it means to how test-driven development works, and what I'm hoping is it will also give us a way to think about expressing the value of test-driven development to people that maybe aren't developers, and to developers as well. So that's going to be very exciting. I'm looking forward to that. And let's see, then the week after that, on the 27th, we're going to be talking about the magic of user stories. This kind of came out of our talk last week or the week before, and I got some feedback, and people were saying they wanted to see more examples of how you would actually grow an application piece by piece. So with this, I'm actually going through, and I'm going to show screenshots of a Kanban board showing how we're taking stories and growing a very simple application. As a matter of fact, the one that I'm using is basically a rewrite of this platform that I'm showing you right here, the events.agilelnl.com. I wanted to try some things with a different language, and so I thought, well, let's try writing the bare minimum we would need to get to the point that it would be able to replace this system. I don't know if I'm going to actually replace it with it or not, but it gave for a nice me thinking through something that hopefully you've all experienced pieces of, so it won't be totally foreign. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then, and this is probably my favorite graphic of all time, what mob programming is not. Aston Chadwick is going to be joining us to talk about what mob programming is not. So if you imagine a mob of farmers all yelling at the computer screen, that may be one of the things that it's not, but we'll see. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this talk. This is going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, I love that image. And then after that, on the 2nd of April, David Horowitz is going to be talking about retrospectives. So he runs a company that makes a tool for enabling retrospectives. So he's obviously spent a lot of time thinking about how to enable retrospectives that are efficient and stuff. So he's going to be talking to us. It's going to be talking about the logic behind a lot of the stuff that they put into their product. But those are things you can use, whether you use their product or not. It will give us some good ideas for how to be effective in retrospectives. A link to the event. Okay, so if you go to, let me just type this right here. And so if you go to that page, you should be able to see everything. And I'll be sending out invitations to this later on, but these are the ones that are coming up. And we got some more coming. And I do want to tell you, if there is something and you say, you know what, there's somebody that I think would be great to be on the Agile Lunch and Learns, please send me the name, or if there's a topic you'd like to hear about. Let's see. And then the other thing I want to mention is here is that Maven course that we've got coming up. I think this is the last week you can sign up for it, maybe the 14th. So maybe, I think it's set up to tomorrow being the last day you can enroll in. We're going to be going through these 5 books and looking at how we're going to be mining the books for what we can learn about improving our Agile teams. We're going to be using summaries of it. So we're going to do an hour a week. You don't have to do anything outside of class. You can if you want. If you want to actually get the entire book and read it, that's awesome. But we're going to be using summaries so you can do everything in class and really dig into what we can take from those to apply to our Agile teams. It's going to be a small group, very different than the big one here. But if you are interested, here is a link. I'll make sure you get this. Anyway, this link will get you, I think, $100 off. And if you have any questions about it, go ahead and send me an email. If you're interested in doing it but not sure how to make it work with your company's reimbursement or something like that, please reach out. If you are interested in doing this, I'd like to try to find a way to make it work for you. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Very much smaller group of people, but we're going to work through this together. And this is kind of my inaugural try of this type of course. So I'm excited to get the feedback from everybody on how it works for them. Okay, back to our regular programming. Okay, so it looks like most of us are saying that stories being used by customers are what the team is seeing as most important. Now this is interesting because last time I did this class last year, went through this session, this number right here on the bottom was much, much lower for the group I did it with. But this looks healthy, right? Stories being used by the customer are the most important. Stories that are deployed to QA are important but less, and stories that are code complete are even less than that. I would suggest that in a lot of teams, while this looks like the correct response here, on a lot of teams I've worked with, the stories that are code complete is much, much further to the right. And stories that are being used for the customers is much, much further to the left if we look at what the teams actually are doing in the way that they prioritize their work. So this is the correct answer, but I would encourage you to watch your team and saying, is this actually what's happening? It could be that this is what we know is the right answer. We could say this is what is actually most valuable, but if we're not actually working with things on a day-to-day basis, are our stand-ups focused on this being the most important? Our story selection, the way we split stories, the way we interact with the customers. Because it's very possible for us to know the right thing, the right answer, but it not actually impact the way that we're doing our daily work. And that's not to say, oh, there's something going wrong with your team. This is a constant struggle, right? Is to make sure that we're actually applying what we know in the best way possible. Okay, working software in the hands of the customer is the measure of progress. This is one of the ways we make sure we have a healthy sense of urgency. And if you ask yourselves this, which is better, 80% of the app being 100% done and live and usable versus 100% of the app being 80% done, well, obviously we'd rather have something that does 80% of everything that we need it to do and is usable versus having something that little pieces of things are done. Almost every piece is done, but nothing is actually usable. And there was a team I was not working with directly, who I knew some people on, that a fairly large project, and they ran into this problem. The way that the work was being approached got them to the point that every piece of the application had been partially built, and the project was eventually canceled. Had they been able to be in the situation to where 100% was done of 80% of the things it needed to do, the project probably wouldn't have been canceled because they would have had something that they could actually use that was being used. The risk would have seemed a lot lower to the stakeholders, and they would have been getting return on investment from it sooner. So we want to make sure we're in that top category, not the bottom. Okay, another tip for making sure we've got a healthy sense of urgency. We want to manage our days and our sprints. because that's what we can actually manage. We can say, this is what we can see. We can try to do, we're going to strive for doing these things and we're going to do our best to hit it. But then forecast the months and quarters. Too often, what I see teams doing is they get very, very focused on the days and sprints are just kind of, well, that's just how things will be. And they're not really paying attention to that. But they get really, really detailed on the months and quarters of what's going to be done in the future. That's not quite as useful because those are the things we have the least control over. What we really want to do is say we want to really focus on our days and sprints, making sure we're being as optimal in the way we work in those as possible, and then using that information and the historical information to forecast the months and quarters to say, are we on the right track? If you've been to any of my talks on forecasting, that's what you can use to help drive this. Urgency directly correlates with how much you are willing to leave out. Now, I think this is a very important key thing here, and let me give an example of it. When my wife was pregnant with our son, she went in for a doctor's appointment. He was, let's see, I think he had another 2 or 3 months before he was supposed to be born. She went in for a doctor's appointment, and the doctor was like, okay, something's not right. You need to get to Kansas City as soon as possible. So she called me in, I got in there, and I'm talking to the doctor. I was like, okay, so should we run home and get a bag of clothes and stuff? She's like, no. She's like, the reason I am sending you to Kansas City, I'm having you drive, is because I think you will actually be faster than the ambulance. And so by telling me, don't even go home and get a bag of clothes, what she was telling me to leave out gave me a very good idea of what my sense of urgency was. By saying, don't even do that, that's not important, because what's really important is you getting to Kansas City right away. And I made it to Kansas City. We made it to Kansas City in record time. And he was born early, but he's fine now and everything's great. But I thought that was a great example of the doctor basically saying, here, I'm asking, well, should we do this? And she's like, no, that's not important at all. So our sense of urgency is very much tied to what we're willing to tell people to leave out. This can be really hard for software teams to do, and is one of the reasons that it's so hard to prioritize, because oftentimes no one wants to actually leave anything out because they're afraid if we don't ask for this now, we'll never get it. And so you end up with just really bad prioritization, which hurts your sense of urgency. It makes it not a positive sense. So you've got two teams. Team A, how much can we fit into this story? And Team B, that's saying, how much can we leave out of this story in order to get the most valuable pieces into the customer hands earlier? Team B is going to perform much, much better in actually delivering software. Okay, so here's a question. Actually, I'm going to move on through this because we're running a little bit short on time here. But think about what actually drives a sense of urgency in your team. So simple solutions that embrace change are what we want to focus on to have healthy urgency. Laser focusing on delivering things that the user can demonstrate. And that's one thing we're going to look at in the talk about the magic of user stories. We're going to really dig into how we can have the stories that are driven by, here's how the user would experience this. Even if it's something as simple as the user can go to the URL and they can see the name of the application on the top of it. Making users happy is one of the best types of urgency. And if you're able to do this, you end up with this virtuous cycle that's continued to reinforce itself, where you've got urgency that's driving good behavior, which is creating more of the good type of urgency. It's very invigorating. Now, there's the opposite way too, where things are just spiraling out of control, but this is what you want to achieve. A question I like to ask teams is, say, is there any possible future where we would be willing to go live without this particular thing we're working on? This question, and if you can get honest answers to it, is probably one of the best ways to get a healthy sense of urgency. Because if I'm asking this question and we're actually getting good answers, I'm now making it very clear what we're willing to leave out. And if you've got a development team that's really hearing from management and stakeholders what the stakeholders are willing to leave out or defer in order to get the things that are more valuable, that makes a very strong impression as far as what's urgent to try to deliver. So what are some of the possible futures? Entire team gets sick for 1 month. Okay, that's a possible future. What would I be willing to leave out if I was going to have everybody down for a month? And if there is something that I'd be willing to leave out, I shouldn't be working on it now. I should be working on something that we couldn't leave out. A competitor announces they will enter the market. What would I have wished I had left out in order to get into the market sooner? Key employee announces they're leaving. Is there any piece of this software that I would say I should have built that before? Or leadership says if you don't hit your go live date, the project will be scrapped. Well, is there anything we could possibly go live without that we would have wished we had built instead of these other things that were really important in somebody's pet project? Entire country has to work from home, yes. Things that were people's pet project that maybe we could have done without. I was working on one project and they really wanted to include blockchain in it, which was a really cool idea, but it wasn't something that would actually have kept the project from going live. And they eventually decided not to work on that early, but the amount of effort they spent in just trying to decide when or if they should do it was all things that came at the expense of things that could have, that they could have actually delivered. And they could go back and trade that time for it later. Okay, so last story, and then we're going to do a quiz, give away a book. This is a picture of, I think it was staged, but all these people up eating lunch on a skyscraper in, let's see, this is New York. So there's Central Park up there. And there's a story I heard once about these people that were up on a skyscraper and they were eating lunch and there were 3 guys and one of them fell asleep while sitting something like this. So he's sitting there snoring. And the other 2 guys realized that they needed to wake him up. So this was a very urgent situation. So they could have yelled at him and said, "Hey, Bob, wake up, you're going to fall." Okay. That had a very high chance of scaring him, the bad sense of urgency, and making him actually fall, creating the very thing they were trying to prevent. On the other hand, or what they ended up doing though, is they're like, okay, Bob's a really big fan of this particular sports team, so they started talking about a recent game, a little bit loud to make sure he could hear. And Bob's there asleep, and he kind of wakes up and joins the conversation. Probably didn't even realize he had nodded off. And what they had done there is they had been very, very careful not to create a negative urgency. They created a positive sense of urgency. Bob wanted to listen to what was being discussed about his favorite team. But I like that example because I think it kind of shows that we can create urgency in lots of different ways, and we can do it in ways that are extremely detrimental, or we can be careful how we do it and try to create urgency in a way that actually creates positive change. Okay, so join the Mentimeter, and looks like we've got 6 questions here. So we got 50 players ready. I will give it just another second. Actually, let me paste this here one more time because if you haven't joined, this is the fun part, right? So go ahead and join if you haven't. Let me give the link here one more time. And 3 seconds left. 2, 1, start quiz. Okay. Oh, and we're giving away a copy of my, I'll tell you what, we'll give away 3 copies of my productivity book to the top 3 spots. Okay, how's that sound? I think fewer people have that one. Okay, how can we encourage positive urgency? Berate employees, cut the scope to bring the go live date closer, focus on what needs to be done by 24 months from now. What can we do to encourage positive urgency? So yes, we want to cut the scope to bring the go live date closer, right? If we can say, hey, we thought this was going to take 4 years, we're going to cut out half the scope and try to deliver something in 2 years, that will encourage a much more positive sense of urgency. If we focus on what needs to be done 24 months from now, we're actually creating urgency that will probably encourage us to batch more things together instead of trying to deliver smaller things more frequently. And okay, let's see our leaderboard. We have, like the animations on these. Thank you. Okay, we got Jeffo on the top spot, followed by Sakura and Stingalicious. Next question. Oh, do I have to? Whoops, hang on, that didn't do what I thought. Let me try this now. What question does Mark suggest asking to drive urgency? If a tree falls in the forest and hits a mime, does it make a sound? How many people have asked for this feature? Is there any possible future where we could go live without this? Or do you have any blockers? What question does Mark suggest asking to drive urgency? And everyone's voted. And yes, is there any possible future where we could go live without this particular thing? Asking if anybody has any blockers can be very important. It's not that we don't want to ask for that. Asking how many people ask for this feature is probably a good question to be asking too. But the big thing we want to focus in on is there any chance we would want something else instead of this thing we're working on right now? Because if we do, we should stop working on that and work on the thing that is more important. Let's see, can Jeff O retain his top spot? And Sakura is in the top spot now. Very good. Okay, next question. Answer fast to get more points. Oops. Okay. Blank is more valuable than blank. Frequency of finishing is more valuable than magnitude of work. Atari 2600 is more valuable than Nintendo Switch, which probably is true, by the way, but that's not for this talk. Working hard is more valuable than delivering software. What is more valuable than what? And yes, frequency of finishing is more valuable than the magnitude of work. It kick you out of the quiz? Did that not work for anyone? Okay. Well, maybe we'll skip that question. Let's see if it lets everybody get in on this one. Okay, there may be a glitch. I think my computer may have shut down for just a second. Should have kept going though. We'll see if it keeps going. Next question. I may need to delete that one and add it back. How did the debt collection system project increase the developer's sense of urgency? Did they order pizza to get people to stay late, deferred the UI for editing holidays, or demoted people who weren't working hard enough? Okay, were people able to answer that time? Let's see, does it say how many? Okay, it looks like we got similar numbers. Hopefully that's working for everybody. Deferred the UI for holiday editing. Yes, that is what that team did. Okay, does this seem to be working for everybody now? Is anyone else still having trouble with it? I may have to dig into it if it's not working. Okay, Sakura is still in the top spot, followed by Matt and Shammy. Very good. What is Mark's dog's name? Okay, does anyone remember my dog's name? These are very important questions, right? And one of the reasons I've thrown some of these in here is some people said, well, I'm having trouble winning, so I'm adding just enough randomness to it to hopefully make it. 2 seconds remaining, and yes, her name is Bella. Very good. Dandy is actually the name of the cat, so you did hear that mentioned. And let's see. Shammy takes the lead, followed by Matt and Tom. Very nice. Okay, and we've got last question here. Fast to get more points. According to the talk, a team with healthy urgency will ask, how much can we fit into this story? How much can we leave out of this story? When is lunch? How can we scale? And I have not had lunch yet, so I am asking the question, when is lunch? But when we're talking about healthy teams, question should be, how much can we leave out of this story? A team with healthy sense of urgency will ask, how much can we leave out of this story? And let's see, top 3 people. So you can send me your email. You can take a screenshot and send it to me if that's easy to do, or I'll probably trust you either way. So Matt took the lead. Matt's got that, and I remember this is for a copy of my book on productivity, so not necessarily computer related. And so Matt, Sakura, and April. Take the 4th person too, okay? Okay, cool. Somebody already has the book. So we'll go Matt, Sakura, April, and Tom. I'm not sure which one you were. Shelley, were you Sakura?
I was Sakura.
Okay. So Matt, April, and Tom. So if you guys want to send me your email address or your mailing address, I will get a copy of the book headed your way later this week. And please do take the time to fill out the presentation feedback. This is very, very useful to me. Like I said, I had the feedback to make this one a little bit longer, which I did, and I also had the feedback to make sure I showed Bella. So any feedback you can give me would be very, very useful. Also, if you're not on the Lunch and Learn invites and you want to be because somebody else just sent you the link, I think there's a place to type that in there and I'll get it headed your way. And just a reminder, other thing is, if anyone is at all interested in that class we've got coming up, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd like to find a way to make it work for you if you're interested. I think we've got about 7 people registered, and I'd like to get to 10 just to have kind of that critical mass. I think we'll be fine with 7, but I'd like to try to get to 10. So if that's of interest at all, let me know. We'll try to find a way to make it work for you. Thank you all for coming. Next week, we're going to be talking to Jitter Ted's going to be joining us. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I encourage you, if you have anyone that is interested in test-driven development, this is going to be an interesting thing. So I'll get this invite sent out right after, just a little bit this afternoon. So when you get it, if there's anything that anyone on your team that you think might be interested, go ahead and forward it to them. These invites can be forwarded to anyone else. Forward it to them and let them take a look at it and see maybe they'll be useful to your team. Thank you everybody for coming. I'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat. But good to see